Marcus was tired,
Oh
not the kind of
my
tired that sleep
God.
could fix. He was the kind of tired that comes from doing the same thing for 17 years without anything ever changing. Every morning at 5:30, he would wake up in a small apartment near the palace grounds. Every morning, he would drink the same black coffee. Every morning, he would put on his uniform and drive to work in his old car that made a strange sound when the weather was cold. The palace where Marcus worked was very big and very beautiful. It had tall white walls and green gardens, and many rooms where important people lived and worked. From the outside, the palace looked perfect. It looked like nothing bad could ever happen there. It looked like a place where everything was safe and everything was in its right place. But Marcus knew something that most people did not know. The palace was full of secrets. He had learned this slowly over 17 years, not from anyone telling him. He learned it just by watching, by paying attention, by noticing when people looked at each other in a certain way, by hearing conversations that stopped suddenly when he walked into a room, by understanding that a place with so many locked doors and so many people watching had a reason for all that watching and all those locks. On this cold Tuesday morning, everything was the same as it always was. Marcus arrived at 5:30. He drank his coffee in the security office. He reviewed the night logs that showed nothing unusual. He checked the camera monitors that showed empty corridors and quiet gardens. And then, like always, he began his morning walk around the palace grounds. This walk was important to Marcus. It was the only time when the palace was truly quiet. The sun was just starting to come up, making the sky orange and pink. The gardeners had not arrived yet. The kitchen staff had not started their work. The offices were all empty. In these quiet moments, Marcus could think. He could feel like the palace belonged to him instead of the other way around. He was walking past the East Service entrance when something made him stop. It was a very small thing. Most people would not have noticed it. But Marcus noticed everything. The lock on the East Service entrance was slightly open. Just a tiny bit. Just enough that if you were not paying careful attention, you might think it was closed properly. Marcus stood there for almost a full minute. He did not touch the door. He did not open it further. He just stood there and looked at it. His heart was beating faster than normal. Something was wrong. He did not know what, but he knew that something was different from how it should be. In 17 years, the East Service entrance lock had never been left open. Marcus reached for his radio with a hand that was shaking a little bit. He was not a person who got scared easily. He had trained himself not to show emotion or fear. But right now, standing in front of a door that should have been closed, he felt something breaking inside the orderly world that he had spent 17 years protecting. "This is Marcus," he said into his radio, and he was pleased that his voice sounded calm and professional. "I need a security team at the East Service entrance." Immediately, the response was quick. Within 4 minutes, 3 officers arrived. One of them was David Chun, a young man who had only worked at the palace for 3 years. David was smart and careful, and Marcus liked working with him. David looked at the broken lock, and his face became very serious. "Someone did this on purpose," David said quietly. "This is not an accident. Someone knew what they were doing." Marcus felt something cold move through his body. He had known this already, but hearing David say it made it real in a different way. Someone had come to the palace. Someone had broken through the security. Someone was inside. He thought about his daughter. Sarah was 17 years old, and she sometimes came to visit him at the palace. She liked to walk in the gardens during the spring when the flowers were blooming. He would tell her stories about the history of the palace, about the important people who lived there, about how it was his job to keep it safe. She was proud of her father. She would tell her friends at school that her father was a security officer at a real palace. She would say it like it was the most important job in the world. Now, standing in front of the broken lock, Marcus wondered what he would tell her. What would he say when she asked if the palace was really safe? How could he tell her that the place he had promised to protect had been broken into? He activated the security protocol that would put the palace on alert. He did not move very quickly or very dramatically. The palace had taught him to never show panic, to never let people see that something was wrong. But inside, Marcus was falling apart. 2 hours later, Marcus was sitting in a small security office with his supervisor, Thomas Rothschild. Thomas was an older man, maybe in his 60s, and he had been working at the palace for 40 years. Thomas had a way of looking at problems that made everything seem less scary, even when the problems were very big. "We will find out what happened," Thomas said to Marcus in a voice that was very kind and very sure. "We always do. The palace knows how to protect itself." But Marcus was not sure if that was true anymore. He had spent 17 years believing that the palace was unbreakable. He had spent 17 years believing that if he did his job correctly, nothing bad could happen. He had spent 17 years telling himself that he was protecting something important and good. Now, a broken lock had shown him that all of that might have been a lie. That evening, Marcus drove home slowly. He did not want to go home. He did not want to sit alone in his apartment and think about what had happened. He did not want to lie in bed and wonder who had broken in and why and what they had wanted. Instead, he drove to his daughter's school and waited in the parking lot. When Sarah came out, she saw his car and ran over to it. She was smiling, happy to see him, not knowing that her father's world had broken into pieces that day. "Hi, Dad," she said, getting into the car. "Why are you here? You're not supposed to work today." Marcus looked at his daughter. She was so young. She believed that the world was good and safe and that her father could protect her from anything bad that might happen. He did not tell her about the broken lock. He did not tell her about the security breach. He just drove her to her favorite ice cream shop, and he listened to her talk about her day at school, and he tried to remember what it felt like to believe that everything was going to be okay. But in his heart, Marcus knew that something had changed, and he knew that before this was over, he would have to understand what the palace really was and what it really protected, and why someone had been willing to break through its perfect walls. The next morning, Marcus did not sleep much. He lay in his bed, thinking about the broken lock. He thought about what it meant. He thought about why someone would want to break into the palace. At 3 a.m, he got up and made coffee and sat on his small balcony, looking out at the city. When he arrived at the palace at 5 o'clock, before his normal time, Thomas Rothschild was already waiting for him. Thomas had a small office on the ground floor with pictures on the wall, showing 40 years of palace history. There were pictures of kings and queens and important events. There were pictures of Thomas when he was younger, standing beside people in fancy clothes. "We need to talk about what we found," Thomas said, and his voice was very serious. Marcus sat down in a chair across from Thomas's desk. He felt like he was in trouble, even though he knew he had done nothing wrong. "The lock was not just broken," Thomas said slowly. "Someone opened it from the inside. Someone with knowledge of how the security system works. This is not a person who broke in from outside. This is a person who was already here." Marcus felt something heavy fall onto his chest. He could not breathe properly for a moment. Inside, the person who had broken the lock was someone who worked at the palace. Someone Marcus probably knew. Someone he probably said hello to in the hallways. "How do you know?" Marcus asked, but he already knew the answer. "Because the electronic alarm did not go off," Thomas explained. "Only someone who knows the security system could disable the alarm and make the lock look broken. Someone on the inside." Over the next hour, more people arrived. There was David Chun, the young officer who had examined the lock. There was Margaret Stone, who managed all the cameras and security recordings. They all sat in Thomas's office, and they all looked worried. Margaret had been studying the camera footage from the night before. She looked very tired, like she had not slept either. "There's something strange," she said, showing them her computer screen. "The cameras in the East Corridor are not recording properly. Someone has made changes to the system." "What do you mean, changes?" David asked. "I mean, someone has been inside the camera system and moved things around," Margaret said. "The cameras are still working, but they are not seeing the East Service entrance. It is like someone wanted to make sure that no one could see that door." Marcus listened to all of this, and he felt like the ground was disappearing under his feet. This was not a simple break-in. This was someone who had planned everything carefully. This was someone smart and dangerous. "Who has access to the camera system?" Thomas asked. Margaret looked at him, and her eyes were very sad. 7 people, she said quietly. "Only 7 people in the entire palace have access to the camera system, and I am one of them." The room became very quiet. Everyone looked at Margaret. Marcus could see that she was scared. She was scared that people might think she had done something wrong. "We will not think that," Thomas said gently. "We will investigate everyone equally." But we need to know who else has that access. Margaret told him the names. And when she said the names, Marcus recognized all of them. They were all senior security officers. They were all people that Marcus had worked with for many years. One of them was his friend. One of them had helped him when his father died. One of them had a daughter who was close in age to Marcus's Sarah. And one of them had broken the rules and entered the restricted area without permission. By the afternoon, they had discovered something else. Someone had gone into the East Storage Building. This was the building where old documents were kept. This was the place where important papers from long ago were stored and protected. Someone had been in there and had taken things out. But we do not know what they took, Margaret said. The camera footage shows someone going in and coming out, but we cannot see their face clearly. They knew where the cameras were pointing. They knew how to stay out of the light. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the palace gardens looked beautiful. The sky was blue. There were workers cutting the grass and fixing the flower beds. Everything looked normal and peaceful. But inside, everything had changed. What was in the storage building? Marcus asked. Old records, David said. Documents from many years ago, from the 1980s and 1990s. Why would someone want old papers? Marcus asked. Nobody answered him. But Marcus could see something in Thomas's face. He could see that Thomas knew something. He could see that this was not just about a broken lock or a camera system anymore. That evening, Marcus sat in his car in the palace parking lot. He did not want to go home. He did not want to be alone. He called his daughter Sarah. Hi, sweetheart, he said when she answered. How was school? Good, Dad, Sarah said. We had a test in history. I got an A. Marcus smiled, even though he did not feel happy. That is wonderful. I am very proud of you. Dad, Sarah said, and her voice changed. Are you okay? You sound sad. Marcus did not know what to say. He did not want to lie to his daughter, but he also did not want to tell her that he was scared. He did not want to tell her that he had discovered that his world was not as safe as he thought. I'm just tired, he said finally. Work has been busy. You should rest, Sarah said. You always tell me that I should rest when I am tired. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his car for a long time. He thought about his 17 years of work. He thought about all the days he had walked around the palace thinking he was protecting something good. He thought about how wrong he might have been. He thought about the fact that someone he worked with, someone he trusted, had broken the rules. Someone had taken old documents. Someone had lied to everyone and hidden their face from the cameras. And Marcus did not know who it was. Inside the palace, the investigation was continuing. In different offices, different people were asking questions and looking at records. In a security room, Margaret was studying the camera footage frame by frame, trying to see the face of the person who had done this. In his office, Thomas was looking at old files, trying to understand why someone would want documents from so many years ago. And in the hallways, people walked past each other, not knowing who among them had broken the trust of the palace. Not knowing that one of their friends, one of their colleagues, was a secret that the palace could not keep much longer. The broken lock had started something that could not be stopped. And everyone at the palace, from the king to the kitchen staff, could feel that something was wrong. Something was broken, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 days had passed since the broken lock was discovered. 3 days of looking at every person at the palace and wondering if they were the one. 3 days of trust turning into doubt. 3 days of the world becoming a darker and scarier place. Marcus could not stop thinking about the 7 people. The 7 people who had access to the camera system. He knew all of them. He had worked with all of them. He had eaten lunch with some of them. He had gone to birthday parties for their children. He had watched them live their lives day after day, thinking they were good people. Now one of them was a liar. One of them was a thief. One of them had broken the rules and stolen things from the palace. The investigation had become very intense. Thomas Rothschild was spending all his time looking at records and asking questions. Margaret Stone had stopped going home. She was sleeping in her office, looking at camera footage hour after hour, trying to see a face, trying to see something that would prove who it was. David Chin was also working very hard. He was checking the security logs, looking for people who had been in places they should not have been, looking for evidence, looking for the person who had done this terrible thing. Marcus tried to work normally, but he could not. Every time he saw someone from the security team, he would watch their face. He would try to see if they looked guilty. He would try to see if they were nervous or scared. He would try to understand if they were the one who had broken the trust of the palace. On the fourth day, Thomas called Marcus into his office again. This time, Thomas looked very tired. His eyes were red, like he had not slept. His hand shook a little bit when he reached for his coffee cup. "We have found something," Thomas said quietly. Marcus sat down. His heart was beating very fast. "Someone has been changing the security logs," Thomas said. "Someone has been going into the system and making changes to cover their tracks. We found it because Margaret noticed that some of the timestamps do not match up with the camera footage." "Who?" Marcus asked. "We are not completely sure yet," Thomas said. "But there are only a few people who could do this. Only a few people who know the system well enough." Marcus felt like the room was spinning. He knew what Thomas was saying without saying it. It was probably someone very senior. It was probably someone who had been working at the palace for many years. It was probably someone who knew all the secrets. "There is something else," Thomas said, and his voice was very sad. "We found that someone used the access code for James Whitmore on the nights when the storage building was opened." Marcus felt like someone had hit him. James Whitmore. James had been working at the palace for 12 years. James was smart and careful. James had a wife and children. James had been kind to Marcus many times. "It might not be him," Marcus said, but he did not believe his own words. "It might not be," Thomas agreed, "but the evidence is pointing to James. The access code was used from his ID. The times match when he was on duty. The camera shows someone of his height and build, though we cannot see the face." Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Outside, James Whitmore was walking across the palace grounds. Marcus could see him from here. James was carrying some papers. He was walking toward the security office. He looked like a normal person. He looked like someone good. But people were not always what they looked like. "We are going to bring him in for questioning," Thomas said, "tomorrow morning, before the other staff arrive." That night, Marcus could not sleep at all. He kept thinking about James. He kept thinking about James's wife, who was very kind. He kept thinking about James's 2 children, who sometimes came to visit their father at the palace. He kept thinking about how they would feel when they learned that their father was in trouble. He also kept thinking about his own daughter, Sarah. He kept thinking about how important it was to her that her father was a good person, that her father protected people, that her father did an important job. What if Sarah found out that Marcus had not protected people? What if she found out that someone he worked with had stolen things and Marcus had not known? What if she thought her father was not good at his job? At 6 in the morning, Marcus drove to the palace. He arrived earlier than usual. He wanted to see James before the questioning. He did not know why. He did not know what he would say. He found James in the security office, reviewing some papers. James looked up and smiled when he saw Marcus. "Good morning," James said. "You are here early." Marcus could not speak. He just looked at James. He looked at the smile on James's face. He looked at his eyes. He tried to see if he could see guilt there. "Is everything okay?" James asked, and his smile disappeared. "I do not know," Marcus said finally. At 7 o'clock, Thomas arrived with 2 other officers. They did not speak harshly. They did not accuse James of anything. They simply asked him to come with them to a private room. They asked it in a very polite way, like they were asking him to have a cup of tea. But everyone in the security office knew what was happening. Everyone understood that James Whitmore was now the main suspect in the case of the broken lock and the stolen documents. Marcus watched James stand up. He watched James put down his papers. He watched James's face change from confusion to fear. He watched a man that he had trusted realize that he was now in serious trouble. "I do not know what you are talking about," James said as they walked him out of the office. "I did not do anything." But nobody really believed him. After James was taken away, the security office felt very quiet. The people who worked there all looked at each other. They all had questions in their eyes. They all looked scared. They all understood that one of them had betrayed the palace. One of them had broken a lock. One of them had stolen the documents. One of them had lied to everyone. And now the trust that held the palace together was broken too. Marcus sat at his desk and tried to do his work, but he could not concentrate. He kept thinking about James's wife. He kept thinking about James's children. He kept thinking about how one mistake could destroy a person's entire life. He also kept thinking about Margaret Stone, who was still awake in her office, looking at camera footage. He kept thinking about David Chun, who looked like he might cry at any moment. He kept thinking about Thomas Rothschild, who looked like he had aged 10 years in 4 days. The broken lock had broken more than just the security of the palace. It had broken the trust. It had broken the friendships. It had broken the belief that the people who worked there were good people who could be trusted. And now, sitting in his office, Marcus understood something that he had tried not to understand before. The palace was not safe. The palace was not good. The palace was just a building full of people, and some of those people could do bad things. Some of those people could hurt others. Some of those people could lie and steal and break trust. And the people who thought they were protecting something good might actually be protecting something that had darkness hidden inside it. James Whitmore sat in a small room with no windows. The room was very quiet. There was a table and 2 chairs and nothing else. Thomas Rothschild sat across from him, and Marcus stood by the door, watching everything. James's hands were shaking. His face was very pale. He looked like a man who had been caught doing something he had been trying to hide for a very long time. "I did not steal anything," James said, but his voice was very quiet. "I did not break the law to hurt anyone. You have to believe me." Thomas looked at James with kind eyes. Thomas was very good at this. He could make people feel like he understood them, like he was not their enemy, like he only wanted to know the truth. "Tell me why you did it," Thomas said gently. "Tell me why you opened that lock. Tell me why you went into the storage building." James looked down at his hands. For a very long time, he did not say anything. Marcus could see that James was fighting with something inside himself. He was fighting with whether to tell the truth or to keep lying. Finally, James started to speak. "My grandfather worked at the palace," James said. "He worked here as a gardener. A long time ago in 1989. He was a good man. He was honest. He worked hard. He wanted to provide for his family." Thomas did not say anything. He just waited. "One day, something happened at the palace," James continued. "There was a security problem. Someone broke into a restricted area. Someone took documents. My grandfather said that he did not do it. He said he was innocent, but nobody believed him. The palace said that he had stolen things. The palace said that he had betrayed them." James's voice broke a little bit when he said this. He was remembering something very painful. "They fired him," James said. "They told him he could never work at the palace again. They said he was a criminal. They gave him nothing. No apology. No help. They just threw him away. How does this relate to what you did?" Thomas asked. "My grandfather died in 1995, James said. "Before he died, he told my sister that he was innocent. He told her that someone else had done it. He told her that the palace had blamed him so they could protect someone else. Someone important. Someone with power." Marcus felt something move inside his chest. He understood now. He understood why James had done this. "My sister started to investigate," James continued. "She looked at old family documents. She found a letter that our grandfather had written. In the letter, he said that he had been blamed for something he did not do. He said that the palace had covered up what really happened. He said that the person who actually did it was protected because they were important. And you wanted to find the proof," Thomas said. "I wanted to clear my family's name," James said, and tears were now running down his face. "My grandfather died believing that everyone thought he was a criminal. My grandmother spent the rest of her life being ashamed. My mother grew up with this shame, and I grew up with this shame. I wanted to prove that we were innocent. I wanted to prove that my grandfather was telling the truth." Marcus could not look away. He could not stop listening. This was not what he had expected to hear. "The documents in the storage building," Thomas said. "What did you think you would find?" "Records of the 1989 security breach," James said. "My grandfather said in his letter that the palace had kept records of what really happened. He said that if anyone ever looked at those records, they would know the truth." "And did you find them?" Thomas asked. "Yes," James said. "I found them. I found the records of the investigation. I found the documents that showed who had really committed the breach." "Who?" Thomas asked. James looked up at Thomas, and his eyes were filled with sadness and anger and pain. "Someone very important," James said. "Someone that the palace wanted to protect. So they blamed my grandfather instead. They destroyed his life. They destroyed my family's honor. And they kept it secret for 35 years." The room became very quiet. Marcus could feel the weight of what James had said. He could feel the injustice of it. He could feel how wrong it was that an innocent man had been punished so that someone powerful could be protected. "Where are the documents now?" Thomas asked. "At my apartment," James said. "I made copies. I was going to use them to prove that my grandfather was innocent. I was going to demand that the palace apologize. I was going to demand that they tell the truth about what really happened." "But you took the originals," Thomas said. "Yes," James said. "I took them. I did not want anyone to destroy them. I did not want the palace to hide them again. I wanted to keep them safe." Marcus looked at Thomas, and he could see something changing in Thomas's face. Thomas was a man who believed in justice. Thomas was a man who believed in truth. And now Thomas understood that the palace had covered up an injustice. "James," Thomas said slowly, "what you did was wrong. You broke the law. You violated security. You stole documents." "I know," James said. "I know that what I did was wrong. But the palace doing wrong things first. The palace lied. The palace destroyed an innocent man's life. I just wanted the truth to come out." Marcus thought about his own daughter Sarah. He thought about how he had promised to protect her. He thought about how he had promised to do the right thing. He thought about how the palace had broken its promise to James's grandfather. "I am sorry," James said. "I am sorry that I broke your trust. I am sorry that I broke the law. But I am not sorry that I wanted to know the truth. I am not sorry that I wanted to prove that my grandfather was innocent." Thomas stood up. He looked at Marcus. They both understood something now that they had not understood before. The palace was not just protecting its own security. The palace was protecting its own lies. For 35 years, someone at the palace had known the truth. Someone at the palace had known that an innocent man had been blamed for a crime he did not commit. Someone at the palace had known that this man's family had suffered because of a lie, and nobody had done anything. Nobody had told the truth. Nobody had apologized. Nobody had tried to fix the wrong that had been done. Instead, they had just hidden it away in a storage building and hoped that nobody would ever find it. But James had found it, and now Thomas and Marcus had to understand that the palace they thought they were protecting was not a good institution. It was an institution that protected itself, even if it meant destroying innocent people. "We need to see those documents," Thomas said quietly. And in that moment, Marcus understood that the real investigation was just beginning. 2 months had passed since James Whitmore was taken away for questioning. 2 months since the broken lock had started a chain of events that changed everything. Now, on a cold morning, much like the morning when it all began, Marcus stood in the palace gardens and thought about what had happened. The truth had come out slowly. James had not stolen things to hurt the palace. James had stolen old documents because his grandfather had been blamed for something he did not do. 35 years ago, his grandfather had lost his job at the palace because someone powerful had done something wrong, and the palace had decided to blame the grandfather instead. James had spent his whole life knowing that his family had been treated unfairly. James had spent his whole life carrying anger about something that he could not fix. And one day, that anger had become too big to carry alone. So James had broken a lock and stolen papers, hoping to prove that his grandfather was innocent. It was not a good choice. Marcus understood that. Breaking the law was wrong. Stealing documents was wrong. Lying to people who trusted you was wrong. But when Marcus learned why James had done it, he could not hate him anymore. The investigation had moved beyond James into the palace's own history. The king had ordered a full examination of what had happened to James's grandfather all those years ago. People who had been working at the palace for 40 years were brought in to answer questions. Documents that had been hidden away were brought to light. The truth, which the palace had kept secret for so long, was finally being told. James's grandfather had been innocent. He had been blamed unfairly. A more important person at the palace had done the wrong thing, and the palace had decided to protect that person by hurting an innocent man. It was a horrible thing to learn. Marcus had gone to visit James while he was waiting for his trial. They sat in a quiet room, and James told Marcus everything. He told him about his grandfather. He told him about finding the old letters in his family's house. He told him about how angry he had been. He told him about how he had planned everything very carefully, knowing that he would probably be caught. "I wanted to prove my grandfather was innocent," James said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I wanted my family to know the truth. I wanted the world to know that my grandfather was a good man who was treated badly. I know, Marcus had said, and he did know. He understood. He did not agree with what James had done, but he understood why James had done it. James would go to jail. That was certain. But before he went to jail, the palace had done something important. They had apologized to James's family. They had admitted that his grandfather had been treated unfairly. They had created a special fund to help people who worked at the palace, just like James's grandfather, people who had been hurt by unfair decisions made long ago. It was not enough to make everything right. Nothing could do that. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was truth. The day after James's sentencing, Marcus drove to his daughter's school again. Sarah was waiting for him in the parking lot, just like she always did. She got in the car and smiled at him, not knowing that her father had been thinking about her every day during the investigation. "Hi, Dad," she said. "You look happier today." Marcus looked at his daughter. She was right. He did feel happier. Not because everything was okay. Not because the world was good and safe. But because he had learned something important. He had learned that even when bad things happen, people can still choose to do the right thing. People can still be honest. People can still say they are sorry. People can still try to fix the things they have broken. "I'm happy to see you," Marcus said to Sarah. "That is why I look happier." They drove to the ice cream shop again, just like they had done on the day of the broken lock. But this time it felt different. This time, Marcus did not feel like his world was falling apart. This time, he felt like maybe his world could be put back together. "Dad," Sarah said while they were eating ice cream, "you were very sad a few weeks ago, but now you are not so sad anymore. What happened?" Marcus thought about how to explain this to his daughter in a way that she would understand. He thought about trying to explain the broken lock and the stolen documents and the grandfather who had been treated unfairly. But he decided that was too much to put on a 17-year-old girl. "Something at work was broken," Marcus said. "Something that I thought was safe and good was actually broken. And I was sad about that. But I learned that broken things can be fixed. It takes time, but they can be fixed." "Is it fixed now?" Sarah asked. "Some of it is fixed," Marcus said. "Some of it is still broken. But people are trying to fix it. People are being honest about what is broken. And that is the first step to making it better." Sarah nodded like she understood, even though Marcus was not sure she completely did. But that was okay. She did not need to understand everything. She just needed to know that her father was going to be okay. At the palace, things had changed. Thomas Rothschild was retiring. He had served for 40 years, and he had decided that it was time to stop. Margaret Stone was being promoted to a more important position, where she could make sure that the security systems were honest and fair. David Chun was being trained to take over Thomas's job someday. And Marcus was still there, doing what he had always done, walking the grounds in the morning, checking the locks, making sure things were safe. But now he understood something he did not understand before. He understood that safety was not just about locks and cameras and security systems. Safety was about people being honest with each other. Safety was about people telling the truth, even when the truth was hard to hear. One day, about 3 months after the broken lock, Marcus received a letter. It was from James's wife. In the letter, she thanked Marcus for visiting James in prison. She thanked him for understanding why James had done what he did. She told him that James was learning to read and write better while he was in prison. She told him that James was thinking about his grandfather every day, and that knowing the truth about his grandfather had somehow made James feel less angry. "Your kindness has helped my family," James's wife wrote. "You could have hated James for what he did, but you try to understand. You show my family that there are still people in the world who care about truth and fairness." Marcus read this letter many times. He kept it in his desk at home. He would read it when he was sad. He would read it when he was tired. He would read it when he needed to remember that even in dark times, there was still goodness in the world. The broken lock had taught Marcus many things. It had taught him that the world was more complicated than he thought. It had taught him that people could do bad things for good reasons. It had taught him that institutions could be broken and unfair. But most importantly, it had taught him that people could choose to be honest. People could choose to be kind. People could choose to fix the things that were broken. And that was something worth protecting. That was something worth believing in.